Welcome back to the Beyond Money podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to demystifying the world of personal finances and helping you make the best decisions when it comes to your money. In this episode, we are delighted to welcome Kieran Guckian, an artist whose remarkable journey took him from the fast-paced world of tech to the tranquil, expressive world of landscape painting. After facing redundancy from a long-standing career in the tech sector, Kieran embraced a lifelong passion and relaunched his career as a full-time artist. A finalist on the Sky Arts Landscape Artist of the Year and recently featured in The Independent for his inspiring story, Kieran has turned a major life pivot into a creative success story. His experience speaks to so many of us navigating change, especially those wondering what's next after leaving a high-income, high-pressure role. Today we'll explore how Kieran rebuilt his identity and income around what he truly loves, his thoughts on the financial realities of following your passion, and what advice he has for anyone facing redundancy. Let's dive straight in. We hope you enjoy. Hi Kieran, thank you so much for coming in to meet myself and Nick today. Hope you had a lovely weekend.
Yeah, lovely to get the invite. Thanks for having me.
Not at all.
Nice to meet you both.
Not at all. Well, I think the first, I'm going to just tell a little bit of a backstory of where I kind of came across you was I opened the Sunday Independent a few weeks ago and there was a feature in there on you were a finalist in the Sky Arts Landscape Artist of the Year. What an incredible achievement. And I suppose what struck me really about the article is that you spoke a lot about your experience of being made redundant from the tech sector and the transition that you've kind of made over the last number of years into becoming a full-time artist. Art is my passion. I would have been very passionate about art when I was younger. So I was really, really impressed by your article. So huge achievement there. So talk to me a little bit about getting to the final.
Oh, well, thank you. It was great. I applied in 2024. So yeah, a year ago in April. And then you just submit a piece of work and I got a phone call then out of the blue in May saying I was on the show. So I really wasn't expecting to get on. So to get on was huge because there's an awful lot of applicants try and get on the show. So to get on was brilliant.
And what, out of interest, what piece did you submit for that?
My submission was a painting I did up on the Spink in Glendalough. I paint there a lot.
Yeah.
So it was a large enough piece for plein air, for outdoor painting. And it was done right up on the Spink. So yeah, I knew when I painted I was going to submit this one. I was happy with it.
Fantastic. It must have been a brilliant kind of feeling to get.
It was an amazing
as far
feeling.
As you did.
Yeah. Hugely affirming, especially given, I guess, my story. It was actually came at a very important time, I think, for me. It was really, I think I got the phone call really just over a year after I had finally left my last job. So, it was really a year later I was standing in Bristol painting.
Fantastic. And out of 3,000 applicants, 48 were selected to be
so there's 48 and then there's 6 heats and then, from each heat there's one person goes through. So I was one of the lucky ones go through on my heat.
Wow.
And there's a semi-final and
well
then there's a final with 3. Yeah.
So bring us back to, I suppose, your initial stages of your career. You studied art?
Yeah, I did fine art down in Crawford in Cork. So I did a degree down there. So 4 years in Cork. And then I, after that, I did some art stuff, tried this, that, the other. But, I was working in restaurants, the usual kind of post art college thing. And I made a kind of decision. I saw somebody doing some desktop publishing stuff on a Mac one day. And I just did a FOSS course in it. I was interested in it and interested in learning computers and graphics and printing. So I did that. And then I got a job as a graphic designer in an e-learning company. I was there for a good few years. Kind of got into web development then there, learned that end of things. And then, I got into Salesforce.
And how did that kind of transition occur from kind of, working as a graphic designer into Salesforce? Because... Yeah.
Well, like in the company before Salesforce, I had gone through kind of graphic design, web development, and then I'd become in a core team with accessibility. So we were doing a lot of accessibility, because the company sold their product in the US to the US government.
Okay.
So they've got a Section 508, it was called at the time, and it's a compliance thing. So we worked a lot there. We went to Washington. We did really cool stuff.
Brilliant.
And then, so when I left there, I was kind of an accessibility person and a kind of web person. So I kind of set up myself, and I was doing freelance. And that's how I started working with Salesforce. I got some contract work to do this and this. And then I just started going in 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week. And then I got flipped into full-time.
And how long were you there for?
In total, 18 years.
18,
long
wow.
time. Yeah, it was a long time. And I had a great career there. Yeah, I had a really,
And sorry, Kieran, just in relation to the redundancy itself, because obviously you mentioned that it came. Did you expect it? Was it kind of coming, or did it just come out of the blue?
So there had been a lot of stuff going on in the company, and we knew that there was stuff coming. I think for me to be affected, because they did the US teams first, which is normally the way, and then EMEA. It's like, this is coming, and then there was kind of an awful period of a few weeks where nobody really knew what was going on. Then we did know, and for me it was a shock. Yeah, I was, and like I shouldn't have been shocked because everybody was kind of in the line, But no, it was a shock. Yeah, I was kind of shocked.
And was it just a team that was taken out, or
a team?
It was a team. Okay,
so small team, but we were all hit. So yeah, it was a shock. It was an absolute shock to the system. Yeah,
and I think the thing is, like after 18 years, you're kind of institutionalized, and I think you even said that in the article where, and like that, I suppose. I worked in the corporate world myself for a long time, and you do become quite institutionalized.
Yeah.
Talk to me about kind of, I suppose, the whole kind of emotional side of, when the redundancy was announced.
Yeah.
And
I think
what kind of went through your head. And
I think the initial shock is a shock. You get a shock and you're like, oh, and then a lot of fear, like terror. I was really, had a lot of fear when it first happened.
Well, you have 3 children.
I have 3 kids, 49. I was 49 when it happened. I was 50 that September.
And how old were the kids?
They were like, 19, 18 and 10.
So still reliant on you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of fear. I was scared when it first happened. And then I think then you get a bit angry.
Yeah.
There's definitely phases. And you're just like, can't believe it, and you start getting, you can go down a negative path quite quickly. So I tried to not go too far down that road of like, oh, it's not fair, all that stuff. So I think you definitely go through phases of stuff. And then I went through a phase of elation, frankly, because I was like, oh, I'm free. And you know what I mean? It was a decent package. And it was like, oh, that actually gave me a little buffer and, I can take some time off. Yeah. So I was just like, I kind of went through those emotions, and I ended in kind of a good place where I was like, actually, this is fine. You know what I mean? I'll get a break. I can have a think about what I want to do.
And in all of that, did you ever talk to, I suppose, a financial planner or anything like that? Or, Nick might talk to you a little bit about, what people face in terms of the options when they have, they're faced with a redundancy.
Yeah, part of my package was they gave us 6 months with a career coaching.
Yeah.
So I got a career coach for 6 months, and he was amazing. Ted, if you're out there, thank you. But he was great. And so I had that after. So when everything was done, the laptop was sent back, all of that stuff, I still had time, like hours, a number of hours with this person.
And what did he what did he talk to you about?
Well, we had a really good initial chats where it was like, he was talking about if you want to get a similar role at the level you were at, this is probably how long it's going to take. And, we should talk about it. And I got my CV done with them, and all of that kind of stuff was great. So I kind of got that initial conversations done. And then I had a conversation with him where I was like, I think I need to take a break, and I don't think I want to talk about anything, but can I take your hours and push them forward? And he was like, of course. So we took a break for like a month or 2 or whatever it was.
It's interesting, Kieran, because I've spoken to a lot of people, and obviously there are more and more redundancies, unfortunately, that are being announced, or the threat of, for sure. So we've been doing kind of ongoing sort of webinars just to kind of try and help people through the process and get them to understand some of the options that they face, because I know we spoke briefly off camera, but the main things really that we found is sometimes it can be bittersweet. And again, there's a lot of decision making, like we keep talking about kind of financial planning, and it does have that interruption, which is why I say to people, you've got to keep adapting to the change, which is something that you seem to have transitioned into really well. Can you tell us a little bit more about, when the options did come? Because the career coaching piece, that doesn't normally apply to many businesses, unfortunately. Obviously, so sometimes that can be quite daunting. And some people have different impressions. I've spoken to people who have taken a decision to take time off, and that in itself requires some monies, really, so that they have to start thinking about that redundancy package as almost like a form of income that they need to, and then it's a case of how long. And sometimes the environment is more or less conducive. We've seen a little bit of change, for example, in the tech sector. I've noticed over the last year or so, there's a little bit more of a kind of, okay, this might be a bit more of a longer process than perhaps previously. And, that would have been more evident. But tell us a little bit more about, when you were presented the options, did you feel comfortable with what was presented? Did you get time to make decisions? Because I've had situations with clients who have been given figures on a Monday to sign a declaration on a Friday. And it can be quite like taxing for them, it's quite daunting, really.
I think my experience was good. I'll say, because they, I think they packaged it up very well, explained it very well, and there was time. It wasn't. I don't feel like, if I'm remembering rightly, it wasn't kind of like that. So I felt good after the process. I felt it was, as good as it can be. You know what I mean? You're kind of losing your, you're losing your job. But, I felt little things like that were really helpful. You know what I mean? And I've talked to other people in different companies. Like, one bit of advice I'd say to people is, and I've talked to people not in my company, but different things, where sometimes people are given options of like, well, you can take this as a cash voucher, or you can get a month with this person to do your CV. And you know what I mean? And I've talked to loads of people going, I just took the cash. And I would say, do not do that. I would say take every bit of whatever professional little package you're going to get, or coaching, or whatever that is, take it. I would say don't take the cash thing, because the cash thing will be gone.
The things I find typically are, firstly, there is an ability for people before they finish that employment to make this back payment into their pension. And it is this kind of last gasp opportunity. So if there was any bit of advice that I could give people, is to say, well, if you have the option, it's certainly worth considering. Now, sometimes they might need the money from the redundancy in order to do the back payment. And it's a little bit of a kind of a chicken and egg, but sometimes it's a case of if you can get the funds from elsewhere, even over that temporary period. The other thing then is that, when they are presented with the options, there's typically two choices. There can be a third, but without getting into the weeds of it, this kind of waiving right to tax-free cash or retaining. And it's sometimes misunderstood. Sometimes they, the I suppose the lure of this bigger payment can go against them in the future. And it's an understanding that. And then there's also obviously the option about the pension. What do you do? Do you leave it where it is? Do you try and transfer it? Do you move it into a new employer? So there's kind of a few different obstacles. And then lastly, there's the actual payment itself, because as I've mentioned earlier, thinking about what that looks like to a point of, okay, do I pay off my mortgage, or do I use that money to supplement my future income, or do I use that to set up a new business? So there's a lot of different...
How did you make those decisions? I mean, I know you said you engaged with the coach and then took a little bit of a break. And what happened for you then?
I took the break, and I think that was a really good thing to do. I know that's not going to work for everybody. In fairness, I was in a good position because I was 49. So, you know what I mean? My financial pressures were probably less than somebody in their 30s or their 40s even, that way. For sure. I still have financial pressures, of course, but it's not the same as when you're younger and you've got a big mortgage payment or something like that. It's different. You've got childcare, like creches. It's very different if somebody's in their 30s and they've got very young kids, or 40s and young kids, than when you're 49 and maybe they're grown up a little bit. So I did have that ability to take a break. Now, there was pressure even during those first few weeks of that break, where you're on LinkedIn, you're connecting with people, you're having chats, you're going, what is it like there? You know what I mean? And people be like, does this role here? And you're like, okay. And you're in this, I felt I was in a maelstrom in the first few weeks of like real pressure, I felt, to immediately get a, I did have this real fear, and I was like, I have to do this now, while I still have all of this stuff in my head, and I can still talk about this stuff, and it's all so fresh. And there was a moment, I think there was a couple of things that came in LinkedIn, and I was like, somebody was reaching out to me about a job and wanted me to interview, and I made a decision not to. And it was kind of that, I remember that day just saying,
well, that must have been a big moment, because
I think it was for me. And I was painting away at home because I immediately reached for that, to be honest, anyway, because
there's probably therapy in it.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's very good for me. That's why I have to do it. So I was painting a lot at home when I was, going out walking a lot. I was trying to but I made a decision not to, because I was just like, no, I need to take a break. So it was a really tough decision to say, I'm taking a real break.
Yeah.
So, and I said, I'm going to take 3 months and I'm not going to look for a job.
And did you talk to your wife?
I did.
Did you discuss this together?
Absolutely.
About the
absolutely.
plans
And she was like, she's great. She's very straightforward. She's very blunt. She was just like, do you want this job?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, and she's like, yeah, but are you going to be really stressed out and all of that stuff again in this job? Yeah. And I was like, probably. And she was like, what do you want? And I was like, no. And she was like, well, why would you do an interview? You know what I mean? Well, why would you get into the process with somebody if you really don't want it? And I was like, no, you're right. So I stopped. And I kind of just stepped back from all of it. And I did just ignore all stuff that was coming in. Maybe crazy thing to do, but I did really need to take some proper time out where I wasn't worrying about stuff. And I think if you make the decision, it's to say, I'm going to take 3 months out and I'm going to use 3 months of that package to basically fund that. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm going to do. So we planned it. We were like, okay, well, we'll just use 3 months of that and that's fine. So nothing really changed in our financial situation. We just used the 3 months. And during that 3 months is when I was painting more and more and more. And I started going out painting and I was really trying to figure out what to do. And, there was a bit of me, I'd always wanted to go back to college and do a master's in art. That was a sabbatical plan I had.
And was it in fine art or?
Fine art, yeah. Master's in fine art. And that was always a plan. But then I started going out and I started painting and I was painting out in Lockdown. I was painting in all these places and I started doing it like a lot, every second day. I was up in Lockdown, I was up in Glendalough. And then I just had this moment where I was just like, maybe I'll just do this for a while.
Yeah. And when did that kind of occur? And, how did you go from there to kind of turning it from a hobby
It was during that summer that I started painting, and I was during my break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was like, and I was really enjoying it. Yeah. And I just had this feeling like this is what you always wanted to do anyway. And you were always waiting for this moment to come back to art. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of going, well, I'll never get an opportunity like this again. I was like, in my head, I was like, well, maybe this is the thing you were waiting for. This is the moment you were waiting for. So I just kept going. And then I talked to the social welfare people and I said, if I wanted to start selling paintings, I'm on the job seekers, which I was due and all of that good stuff. And I was like, how can I, because I wanted to do it properly. I was like, how can I trade? Like, can I set up a website? And how do I get a business account?
And did you have to make any kind of adjustments to the house? Because obviously, I don't know how large the paintings are, but the way, did you have a studio at home or anything like that?
No, I mean, the attic, I have a corner in the attic where that's where I always painted.
Yeah.
Very, very modest, not a studio. It's just that corner is where I paint. And because I was painting outside, it was more just like storing them somewhere, finishing them somewhere, varnishing them somewhere. So that is still my corner. Half the attic my wife will say it's all the attic now. I've taken over. Yeah. But because I was painting outside, you see, I didn't really need to make any adjustments.
And did you ever engage with the local enterprise office?
I did,
for kind of support
they were great. I had a really good chat with them. They're the people that actually advised me, well, you can change your job seekers into short-term enterprise allowance.
Okay.
So if anybody's in this situation, you can do this. You can keep your payments, but they change the name. It essentially changes the name.
Okay.
And it comes into your bank account. Now you have to do a business plan. You have to do all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But it basically, it's the same term. It's the same length. But it just changes it so that you can trade. You can earn money and you still get your payment. And it's all done with them. So I went through this whole process of that. I got a business account set up with the bank, got my website built, and I just started working towards that.
And do you think your background obviously helped in being able to kind of produce a website?
It did. Yeah, in fairness, it did. Because I've been working in that field for so many years that, I was able to, work out what platform I wanted, all that kind of stuff.
So the original plan, Kieran, was that you obviously were working in tech.
Yeah.
You had built up fairly reasonable provisions, I suppose. And, you know, obviously it provided you benefits like pension scheme and health insurance and things like that, with a view to possibly early retirement. Would that have been in your mindset?
That was always in my head, you know.
And obviously that changed then when this happened. So it's kind of, like we were saying off camera about this whole concept of financial independence and getting to a certain point. And, you know, this, you know, different variations of FIRE, if you want to call it that, but like this barista movement, which is work hard, get the pay, save hard, and then essentially, which in turn really happened to you, maybe not planning.
I think, like, it wasn't a deliberate thing, I don't think, but I think from early age, like, me and my wife have been together since we were 17, and we bought our first house when we were 24, which, like, is young, like, and it was young at the time. So, like, that, and like, we're on a second house now, but we always had a thing of aiming to get rid of the mortgage. And we also always had a mantra of not borrowing. So we really had no debt because we never borrowed to buy stuff. We just didn't buy it. Or whenever we came into anything, we always put it off the mortgage and we always shortened the term.
That was great,
So we always had this thing, and it wasn't to retire, I guess. I mean, this movement didn't really exist, but, you know, but we just always had this thing of like, let's get rid of the mortgage and let's not have any debt. And let's just not get that thing from around your neck, you know, if you can. So we were lucky. I know there's going to be loads of people listening to this going, well, now I know it's totally different now. And like, we have to think.
Is there any advice you'd give your like 20-year younger self if you could?
The one thing I would say is, as soon as I went into a tech company, I would have maxed out my contributions and pension. That's the one thing I definitely would have done, because I think we were always quite financially, we were never silly with money, but that's something I definitely would have done.
Well, I suppose you're getting free money from
because you're getting the contribution, which I got, and I had certain amount in, but it's when you're 24, this is so far away that it's like whatever.
But you're right, because it's not even just the free money from the company, it's the tax back that you get. Because I always say to people on this menu board that I refer to, like, what's the best thing you can do? What's the second best thing? And for me, without even bias, because I say they should do it through their employer. You know, age-related limits are, you know, in your 30s, you can put 20%, 40s, it's 25. And yet many people still just stick to the contribution that gets the most from the employer, which is a bit of a no-brainer, but there is still, and the reason I say this to people is it's about the fact that if you're earning the 6 figures plus, which a lot of people in tech tend to, maybe if you include bonuses, and not realizing that, okay, I can offset some of that and get my tax relief, my 40% back. And essentially build up this pot that from 50, so potentially, you know, the year after you were made redundant, that big fund that you could have had accumulated, or maybe bigger, I should say, not necessarily big, could have been available to you, which would probably put some of those, and especially in the climate we find ourselves, you know, there is this kind of, I suppose, fear, you know, feeling that, you know, you can be infallible almost, you know. I've seen this, and again, no disrespect to people who work in tech, but they're well-paid positions generally. There's stress there, but the financial security is probably the one thing that I always say, you know, it's great when things are doing well, the share price is going through the roof, and it can sometimes alter, and it's having that ability to kind of recognize. But you're right, I think that's probably the biggest thing that I find from people when I meet them in their sort of late 40s and 50s. They haven't really put enough away for the rainy days. You know,
Are you glad that you kind of had that experience in the tech sector? And, you know, did you ever consider going down the artistic route, you know, ever before joining Salesforce or whatever? Because 18 years was a long time. And I know they talk a lot about kind of engaging the left side and the right side of your brain. Were you working in a creative role with Salesforce?
I mean, I was. Like, so when I started, I was doing web development, very much building stuff. And that, you know, that's a very creative world. You're working with designers, you're working with engineers, like, you know, and you're working with marketing people.
It's trying to bring them all together.
Super creative, like and you're problem solving. So it is, I always find it quite creative. Maybe then as you progress and you start getting into management and leadership, it's less so, because then it's more navigating the corporate world and making sure your team are okay. And like, you know, and you're still, you know, but my favorite part of the job was always those difficult, large problem solving stuff, you know, which is creative, and you're using tech and programming, you know, whatever, web development is all quite creative.
Yeah, because I did an MSc in multimedia years and years and years ago. And actually half of the class came from kind of an engineering background and half from an artistic background. And then it's trying to bring the two together, which, you know, can be a challenge at times because you're dealing with kind of different sides of the brain essentially in that whole space.
But and I loved that aspect of I love that aspect of the work where, you know, you're dealing with engineers, designers, UX people, and also marketing people. So you've got all these very, you know, bringing them, you know, and I always was kind of in the middle, like a hub of a spoke, I guess. I always felt like that, which was great. Yeah.
So you've been working kind of as an artist kind of full time for the last...
I'd say coming up on, where are we, 2025, early 2025. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint when
Is it 5 years? Or
no,
2 years?
2 years.
2 years.
Less than 2 years.
Okay, 2 years. And has there ever been a moment in that kind of 2 years where you've kind of said, oh, Jeannie, maybe I need to go back on LinkedIn and start kind of looking again for something else? Or are you...
I've probably had some nights where you're lying awake and you're just like, oh, like, what are you doing? And, you know, this is crazy. I mean, I had a really big moment. I think last March last year, I went live with the website, even though, you know, it had been live, but I went live with it.
And tell us a little bit about the website. Where can people, you know, find you?
Yeah, it's kieranguckian.art.
Okay.
So if you search for me, you should find me, kieranguckian.art. Yeah.
And tell the listeners about what you paint. And
yeah, I paint. I mostly paint outdoors, and I paint landscape. I do portraits too, and I do studio work as well. But I'd say 80% of my work is done outside because that's what I like. It's what I love.
Yeah.
I especially like going up the mountains. I like painting cliffs. Like painting, you know, whatever.
Brilliant.
I do like painting stuff that I enjoy getting somewhere. I enjoy part of that thing of getting somewhere where nobody else is. I like painting stuff that is hard to get to, but not incredibly hard. It makes it sound like I'm going up somewhere crazy. I'm not. But, you know, I do like to do a walk and get somewhere and, you know, like...
And how long would you spend up there? How long?
Oh, I spent like 5 hours, 6 hours. Some days it might be 3 hours. It depends on what I'm working on. If I'm working on a small one, I'll work till it's done normally. If it's anyway bigger, I'll go back. I might have to go back 2-3 times. Some of the big ones, like the one for the program, that was like 5 sessions up there. You know, so some of them will take a fair few trips.
In terms of kind of what you charge for, is it like depends on the commission? Depends on the
commission. Depends on the size. It depends on what. Yeah, it varies. But people can get an idea on my site.
Okay.
And just Kieran, I suppose for those people who are out there who maybe have a passion in something like art, who you know, maybe don't follow their passion because of the fear. Is there any kind of advice that you can give them?
One thing I would say is have a good sit down and have a good think about it and figure out, is it something that you want to do in the future? Is it something that you have a burning thing to do now? And if you don't do it, you're going to be very unhappy, whatever. In my mind, I always knew I was eventually going to go back to this. Whether that was a sabbatical to do a master's or whether it was like when I was 55, 56, just being in a position. And I always wanted to be in a financial position later to be able to say, right, I'm now focusing on art, right? But I guess the only advice is to know that in your head, whether this is something that you're going to do later. And you obviously then have to have a plan to keep your skills up while you go, right? Or is it something you want to do now? I mean, I do think... Like for example, in my 40s, I would never have quit my job and said, I'm going to be a painter now, right? I just wouldn't have been able to do that.
Was there any option for you to do it as a kind of people use the phrase side hustle, but they're always looking to try and look at ways of increasing income.
I mean, I was never doing it for money ever, really. And even now I'm not doing it for money, if I'm honest. Like I'm not a financially driven person. I'm just not, you know, that kind of way. I know it's important.
Yeah,
but I'm not I would never be painting kind of going, and I would never have done in the years I was in tech. I was always painting it. I was always painting, but it was for me, you know, it was for me. Because I think if you want to be painting and you want to be selling it, it's a huge amount of work. Like it's a huge amount of work. You have to be networking. You have to be going to openings. You have to be talking to people. You have to, like, it's a totally different thing. It's actually a totally different thing. I guess what I'm I'm trying to hold on to is paint what I want to paint, and then hopefully people will like it, which they seem to like it, which is great. I think as soon as you start painting,
I think there's testament in getting to where you did in the final. 3 people out of 3,000. I mean, that was just a super, super achievement. It's funny, in that article that I read as well, you mentioned the great artist magazines, and I remember I used to have stacks and stacks and stacks of them.
It's 100% how I got into art.
And you said that it was your parents that had them. Like, do any of your kids have they followed in your kind of artistic footsteps? Or?
They can all draw. Like, when my older two were younger, they were very. I used to be like, you've got a good. They can draw. But they've kind of it's there maybe in the background at some stage. My youngest daughter, she does love it, So I'm hoping
what career advice would you give to them?
I think, I have no regrets. I could say, oh, I should have stuck with this, blah, blah, blah. But it's weird. I think at different times in your life, you're ready for different things. Mm-hmm. So when I left art college, I was really young. I wasn't ready for being an artist. I also didn't have any life experience, any of that stuff. So my career has been really great because it's given me, all the stuff that I've been able to do. You know what I mean? But I also gained a huge amount of knowledge in marketing, in tech, because I was working in marketing in Salesforce. So, I have really just good knowledge around that areas, which is helpful now, that kind of way.
But that's the thing. Sometimes it's through kind of life experience.
Yeah.
And, it probably came at maybe not the most ideal time, but it came probably at a time where it actually allowed you to kind of say, okay, I am now going to try this.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe another couple of years of working in the corporate world may have been good from a kind of maxing your pension and everything like that. But, it comes when it comes, and you have to make that decision.
It's only after the event you can look back and go, I'm really glad that happened.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that happened, because you don't know, if that hadn't happened, I might have stayed for another 10 years. I might have never have left. I might have retired. And I might have got to a moment where I was like in my 60s, let's just say, and I might have had regrets, which I would feel awful about now. Whereas I feel now, let's say none of this works out and I have to go back and get something else or whatever happens. And I don't think that will, but if it did, at least I know I've done this, that kind of way. So I think, going back to your question about advice and stuff, I would say to people, have that plan, even if it's a long-term plan in your mind, so that if an opportunity does come up, that you mentally have already had that conversation with yourself. That's what I would say. Yeah. Like, be ready for something landing on your lap, and it might not be the end of the world. Actually, it might be the opening to something else, because you've already thought about it a bit. I
agree, because I think sometimes the experience has been that people fear that they won't get as well a paid position as they are, because they've obviously been there maybe for a few years, whereas sometimes you have to take a step back.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because there's emotions that are running high as well. So, part of it is down to subjectivity. But what I try and do financially is show them, and we use kind of cash flow kind of forecast to kind of show that they don't need to necessarily be earning as much. Now, it can be maybe a little bit something that you have to kind of take on the chin, because, thinking that you're worth X and then you're getting offered Y.
Yeah.
But the difference is probably that sort of, I suppose, ability to do other things, maybe, whether it's spend more time with your family or whatever that is. And that's that kind of phased approach to retirement, which is becoming more common now. We're also used to this kind of almost like this inbuilt, we work hard and we retire at 65.
Yeah.
And what we do in Alpha Wealth, we spend a lot of time saying to people, well, okay, but forget the traditional model.
Which is probably a really hard thing for people to do anyway, just to kind of stop one day and,
I mean, it's huge adjustments. And there's I think there's a big ego part.
There is.
And that's a very personal thing, where if your feeling of who you are and your worth in the world is tied to your career and how much money you're earning and your position and all that kind of stuff, which is there, right? When that's gone, that's a massive. I really struggled with that for a while, because you're just like going, I'm not bringing anything in, I'm not providing, and I'm also now just this, I'm not in that big company anymore. It is a hard adjustment. This is not easy stuff. It's not but It's worth it.
November, you have a big exhibition planned?
Yeah.
Or how big? Like, it'll obviously keep you busy now over the next couple of months planning for this. So how many pieces of work will you need to have for this exhibition?
I have to figure it out.
Yeah. How much wall space do you need to fill?
Yeah, it's in the Signal Arts Centre in Bray, which is a lovely space. And it's in November. And it'll run for 2 weeks. So yes, I need to get busy. So it's. So
you'll be staying around for the summer and enjoying the hopefully finer weather and.
Absolutely.
It's got to be harder in the winter when, it
can be, but it can be great as well. I actually really like it in the winter. It's tough. It's really tough, and it can be very cold and can be really uncomfortable. But you will get places like Glendalough 100% yourself. You know,
beautiful.
And that's amazing. Like, and you'll see stuff that you maybe wouldn't see in the summer. There's a lot more people, all that kind of stuff. So it can be really good. Like the winter can be good, yeah. Like you get nice lighting effects. It's very different.
I was going to say, are they kind of brighter in this? Like obviously the kind of the tones and the paintings.
Yeah,
it
changes in winter, and you can see different things in winter and summer. So yeah. I'll be busy. Yeah, it'll be a busy summer. Hopefully I'll get some commissions and stuff as well. And
Well, I hope you do. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and wishing you every success with the exhibition and your future career in art. I'm sure you'll make it very successful.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me.
Not at all. And thanks for joining us.
No worries.
Thank you.
All right.